Hi, I'm BECMI Berserker and welcome back to my channel. This video focuses on another aspect of the BECMI or old school game that players arriving from the newer editions of Dungeons & Dragons might like some information on, and that's monster descriptions and their statistics, or stats. Monsters are the stalwart of D&D. The game has been built on exploration, combat and the vanquishing of foes, so without monsters we have no game. However, the mechanical representation of a monster, that is its stats, has changed over numerous editions to account for edition-specific rules. So this video is a bit of a walkthrough of how monster stats were presented in the BECMI Rules Cyclopedia, evolving from the earlier BECMI boxed sets, and how this information was taken forward and abbreviated in published adventures. Today these abbreviations are referred to as stat blocks, although they look a lot different to what we call stat blocks in later editions of the game. As I go through monster stats, I'll do a little bit of rules clarification to put things into context and make it meaningful. So let's dive in and examine monster stats. How were these presented, and what did the information mean? Let's go through this step by step. What you see on the screen is a blank version of how monster stats were presented in BECMI. Let's make this a bit more user-friendly so that we can examine it a bit better. Each monster is presented with its name. Nothing extraordinary in that. However, if a monster's name was to be followed by an asterisk, it means that the creature could only be hit by a special or magical weapon, such as a silver blade or a +2 weapon. This asterisk use is a visual clue to Dungeon Masters to use such monsters with caution. I'm going to start with a simple presentation, so the name of this monster is a Berserker. As you can see, the name of Berserker is not followed by an asterisk, meaning no special weapon is required to hit one. Now into the main monster information. The first statistic we are given is the monster's armor class. This is required so that we understand what value we need to roll on a d20 to hit this creature. For a Berserker, we are told that its armor class is 7. Remember, BECMI uses the descending armor class system, so a first level character with no further adjustments would need to roll a 12 or better on a d20 to hit this Berserker. More often than not, no information is given in the monster description about how an armor class is arrived at, such as dexterity adjustments or armor information. Therefore, it is left to the Dungeon Master to explain this if the subject comes up. If I was to explain this Berserker's armor class, I'd probably say it was down to either wearing leather armor, which has a value of 7, or that it's down to the Berserker's innate toughness in battle. I prefer the latter. The next entry is hit dice, which needs a fair bit of explaining. To put it crudely, hit dice is the equivalent of both a monster's level and power, in that this number determines the amount of hit points a monster will have, and also how effective they are in combat. In respect of hit points, a d8 is rolled for every hit dice a monster has to determine its hit point total. In BECMI, a monster's hit dice is always d8, so a monster would roll their hit dice number of d8s for their hit point total. Sometimes the hit dice entries have a plus or a minus figure next to them. This means the addition or subtraction is added to the hit points rolled. As previously mentioned, the hit dice value in the monster description correlates with combat effectiveness, and we'd need to refer to what's called a monster attack roll table to obtain the value required on a d20 to hit a specific armor class. This can also help us determine the value needed to hit an armor class of 0, which was often referred to as a creature's THAC0, i.e. to hit armor class 0. Knowing a monster's THAC0 enabled players to use simple arithmetic to work out the rest without referring to hit roll charts. Well, that was the intent anyway. Although this is simple maths, it did trip people up occasionally. I did a previous video about THAC0 if you require more explanation, link on the screen and in the description. Just a few more things on hit dice. Many monster stats will show a hit dice value followed by a number of asterisks. This is a visual prompt to the DM that the creature has a number of special abilities equal to the number of asterisks, and that more detail can be found about these abilities in the description. Also, the size of a monster is communicated here as small, medium, or large. Medium just means average man size, with S and L meaning smaller or larger than man size. This is to help determine whether certain abilities can be used against creatures of a certain size, rather than to offer a specific scale. For instance, a horse is described as large, but so is a fire giant. However, they are both larger than man-sized, and mechanically, that's all the information you need. If you want more, make it up. Finally, the number of hit dice and asterisks a monster has affects its experience point value, which I'll demonstrate when I get to that part of the monster stats. So as I'm demonstrating a Berserker here, their hit dice is 1+1 with an asterisk. We can also see that Berserkers are man-sized, At least these Berserkers are. So if I was to determine this Berserker's hit points, I would roll 1d8 and add 1. The asterisk is telling me a Berserker has a special ability, which when I check is that they get +2 to their hit rolls due to their ferocity. Now I know what my Berserker's hit dice is, why don't I go ahead and check that monster hit roll table to work out his THAC0? Looking across the value for 1+ hit dice, I can see that I'm referring to the same values as if my Berserker had 2 hit dice, so clearly these extra pluses on hit dice are significant. Correlating these values with an armor class of 0, and I can see that my Berserker requires a roll of 18. But wait a minute, we've just seen that a Berserker gets a +2 to hit due to their ferocity, so let's move this down the table by 2, meaning their new THAC0 is now the equivalent of what's needed to hit an armor class of 2 when unmodified, which means that a Berserker requires a 16 to hit an armor class of 0. Are you keeping up? Anyway, given that Berserkers are monsters you could meet at first level, that's quite significant. Just one final word on hit dice. As you've probably noticed, monster stats do not include strength scores for adjusting monster hit roll bonuses, but the power of a creature was still conveyed through the monster hit roll chart. For instance, a 6 hit dice monster would have a THAC0 of 14, whereas a 6th level fighter would have a THAC0 of 17, and would need a strength of 18 to be as powerful in combat as a 6 hit dice creature, due to gaining a +3 adjustment. Clearly monsters with high hit dice could hit you often, so being aware of this is key to your character's survival. Okay, let's leave hit dice behind and look at move. Perhaps obviously this refers to the monster's speed. Move is expressed as 2 values, as shown in this example. The first value refers to what's called normal speed, but is also the running speed of a monster. The second value is what's called the encounter speed. In BECMI, what's called normal speed is the distance a creature can cover during one turn, or 10 minutes of exploration, if they are taking their time and being cautious. Obviously this value is unlikely to be used this way in combat, so we can just use it as the running speed, which we are told is 3 times a creature's encounter speed. No attacks can be made by a creature using its running speed. So what's encounter speed? Well, this is the distance a creature can travel in one round and still make their attacks. There has been some confusion on whether attacks and moves can be made in the same round, but I refer people to the paragraph on movement on page 103 of the Rules Cyclopedia whenever this comes up. The speed values shown in move are used as feet for indoor movement and yards for outdoor movement. We are told that this is to account for more cautious movement when indoors. Remember, one round in BECMI is 10 seconds, so moving 40 yards and attacking is perhaps not as much of a stretch as it might first seem, no pun intended. Finally, we may be offered multiple movement speeds in the stats due to a creature's ability to fly, or swim, etc. For now, I'll check the stats for a Berserker, and I can see that its move is 120, 40 feet or yards, depending on being indoors or outdoors. Let's move on to attacks. This is a relatively simple one and refers to the number of attacks and attack types. For instance, a common entry you might come across is 2 claws and 1 bite, which means a monster with this entry would have 3 attacks, 2 of them with claws and 1 of them with a bite. All attacks would be resolved on their turn in the round. So turning to my Berserker, I note that their attacks entry is 1 weapon, so this means I have a bit of flexibility in choosing what this weapon might be. This leads us into damage. Damage is linked to attacks in that, for each attack type, a damage value is returned in the same order. For instance, in the example I gave earlier for attacks consisting of 2 claws and 1 bite, the damage might be listed as 1d6, 1d6, 1d4, meaning 1d6 for each claw and 1d4 for the bite. If there is any other effect conveyed by the damage, then this would be listed alongside, such as poison or paralysis. For example, the damage from a ghoul's 2 claws and 1 bite is given as 1d3, 1d3, 1d3 plus special, with the special relating to their paralyzing attack. So why doesn't the description just say plus paralysis? It does for other creatures. This is because the moniker of special must draw the DM's attention to the specifics of ghoul paralysis, which states that it only affects creatures of ogre size or smaller, and doesn't affect elves. Whenever special has been used as a descriptor, it's recommended the DM pays closer attention to the consequences of a successful attack. All this is a bit moot when it comes to my Berserker. His attack is 1 weapon, so therefore his damage is whatever that 1 weapon does, usually given in the text as by weapon. Specifying what the weapon is becomes more relevant when placing this creature in a scenario, and we'll show that when giving an example of a stat block. Before then, let's move on to number appearing. The entry at number appearing, often abbreviated to no appearing back in the day, was given as two random values, one in brackets and one outside. The first value was to help a dungeon master determine how many monsters of this type were encountered in a dungeon. The second was for when monsters were encountered in the wilderness. It's important to state that these numbers were just guidelines, and there were recommendations on how to change these values depending on which level of the dungeon the creatures were found. Ultimately, the number appearing was up to the DM, but this did help when considering balancing encounters. So when it comes to Berserkers, the guidelines are that when encountered in a dungeon, there would be 1d6 of them, and when encountered in the wilderness, there would be 3d10 of them. And there I was, thinking I was unique. Oh well, let's move on to Save As. This one is pretty self-explanatory, and links directly to saving throws. In essence, what saving throws a monster has is given as a character class equivalent. So if our entry for Save As was F8, then this would mean that the monster would have the same saving throws as an 8th level fighter, and you just have to refer to the fighter saving throw table to know what these were. So returning to my Berserker, we can see that he saves as F1, or a 1st level fighter. So let's get the fighter saving throws on the screen for a moment, and we can see what those values are when they're called for. Simple. Okay, now it's time for morale. Morale is actually an optional rule in BECMI, but we are given an entry for it with every monster description, and told that it is a measurement of courage in combat. Sometimes 2 morale scores are given, to take into account whether a creature is with their leader or not. What this means in practice is that this entry may be used by DMs to randomly determine a monster's resolve when certain conditions are met. Numerous examples are given in the rules, which include when first being hit, or when the first monster in a group is killed, or when half the monsters in a group have been killed. In short, it's a nifty device to randomly determine whether a monster fights or flees, when a DM can't decide what the monster should do or doesn't want to. To check a monster's morale, 2d6 is rolled. If the result is over a monster's morale score, then it either surrenders or flees. The DM would decide how that plays out, but this mechanic can make for some unexpected results when otherwise every encounter might end up with a fight to the death. All of a sudden you've got 4 kobold prisoners. What do you do with them? Interrogate them, convert them from their misbegotten twisted philosophies, or quietly murder them when the rest of the party are asleep? Morale makes for extremely interesting encounters, and I strongly recommend its use in any D&D game. Looking at the Berserker's morale, we can see that it's actually 12. Obviously you can't roll over 12 with 2d6, so this means that Berserkers do not flee combat, which kind of makes sense. However, if this morale score was less than 12, then there would always be a chance that this monster would run away if the Dungeon Master used this optional rule. Treasure type is an interesting monster statistic, as it offers a way to randomly determine how much treasure a monster is either carrying or has in its lair. It is represented as an alphabetical value or type, which can be used with what are called treasure tables to work out a monster's treasure. A monster's treasure type is sometimes accompanied by a multiplier, obviously for when the creature usually has more treasure, or sometimes a monster has 2 types, with one of them being in parentheses and the other not. All this means is that the type in parentheses represents the amount of treasure a monster is carrying, and the type given outside parentheses is for when the monster is found in its lair. Therefore, where a monster is defeated determines the amount of treasure that a party may immediately find. This Berserker has a treasure type of P, B, so what it carries amounts to treasure type P, and it has whatever the value of treasure type B is stashed in its lair. Let's have a quick look at those treasure tables to put all this in context. So if P is my carried treasure, then that would amount to just 3d8 copper pieces in coins, and no extra gems, jewellery or special bits and pieces. However, if you defeated this Berserker in his lair, home or hideout, then we would refer to type B, which shows that there is a 50% chance of there being 1d8 copper coins, 25% chance of 1d6 silver coins, 25% chance of 1d4 electrum coins, and a 35% chance of 1d3 gold coins. There is no chance given for there being any platinum coins. As for the other items, there's a 25% chance of there being some gems and jewellery, and a 10% chance of there being a magical sword, or other weapon or armour. This treasure table is supported by numerous others, where types of gems, jewellery and magical items can be randomly determined. This is what I was doing during the bulk of my misspent youth. How exciting. Anyway, treasure type was a useful tool for determining monster treasure, which, in my opinion, makes more sense than linking treasure to challenge ratings in later editions, as a challenge rating doesn't really take into account a monster's predisposition for accumulating wealth. Okay, so that was treasure type. Next, it's intelligence. This quite obviously sticks out, as it's the only ability score that is mentioned for a monster. In fact, a monster's intelligence score was not included in monster stats until the Master Rules were released in 1985. The image you see on the screen is how monster stats were listed in the basic rules, released in 1983, and you can clearly see intelligence is not listed. So why was it deemed necessary? Well, apart from giving Dungeon Masters some idea of how to play the role of certain monsters, that is, as a clever tactician or mindless zombie, an intelligence score also helps resolve debates around how long certain spells would work, specifically charms and maze, which referred to durations based on the victim's intelligence in their descriptions, which ended up being meaningless without a statistic for this intelligence. This led to the Master Rules devoting a couple of pages to allocating average intelligence scores to all the monsters from the previous 3 box sets, and is why intelligence ended up being included in a monster's stats from then on. We are informed that a Berserker's intelligence is 9, so the low end of average. I'm not sure whether to take that personally or not. Anyway, equipped with this information, a Dungeon Master is able to determine how a Berserker is affected by a successful charm or maze spell, demonstrating its usefulness. Right, the next one in the list is alignment, which in BECMI only consists of lawful, neutral or chaotic, and informs Dungeon Masters of a monster's moral standpoint, so how to play them. I could go into these in some detail, but I did a whole video on BECMI alignment, link on the screen and in the description, and it's probably best I refer you to that to do this subject justice. A Berserker's alignment is neutral, so has no major moral convictions one way or another. Again though, alignment can be treated as a guide. If you wish to change this to suit your game, then do it. And so we come to XP value, effectively meaning the amount of experience points one would gain for defeating a monster. This number is directly linked to hit dice, and so we must refer to the experience point for monsters table to make sense of the number we'll show in the statistic. I've mocked up a section of it here. As you can see, the monster's hit dice returns a value in the second column. Then for each asterisk or special ability the monster has, a further value is added from the third column to achieve a total XP value. So reading across a Berserker's hit dice of 1+1 with an asterisk, we would first take the amount given for a 1+ hit dice creature, which is 15, and then add the amount for having 1 asterisk, which is 4, giving a total XP value of 19. Checking the Berserker monster statistic, we can see that this is correct. Although this might seem a more convoluted way of determining XP values when challenge ratings have been around for almost 25 years now, in my opinion it does allow for the accounting of special abilities in a way that, to me at least, makes sense. Obviously I'm biased, but what do you think? Okay, so here's a completed list of monster stats. Well, not exactly. In the Rules Cyclopedia, we are offered a number of expanded criteria, in addition to its basic description, to really flesh out these monsters. These are monster type, which helps categorize monsters, terrain, which helps understand where certain monsters can and should be found, load, which is an optional detail that is more relevant to beasts of burden or steeds, and barding multiplier, which is also an optional bit of detail and really is just a figure for multiplying barding encumbrance and costs for creatures equipped with it. I just want to touch on monster type for a moment. Here's a list of the types or categories given in the Rules Cyclopedia. These monster types were not given in the earlier BECMI box sets, and I made an argument in my Rules Cyclopedia video about how this type of categorization first appeared in D&D in that publication, and no one has told me I'm wrong yet. If I am wrong, then please correct me in the comments. Regardless, this kind of categorization enables there to be a catch-all reference to what kinds of attacks do or don't affect each monster type. And if you were wondering why there is a monster type, it's just for when a creature doesn't fit into any of the other categories. Each of these monster types was accompanied by whether the creature was common, rare, or very rare, to enable a Dungeon Master to make decisions on the frequency of its appearance. So going back to the Berserker, his monster type is human, and it seems that Berserkers are found infrequently, so they are rare. They are also found in any terrain, meaning you could use them in any adventure. Being a human, he doesn't have load information for being a beast of burden, and he would certainly not be wearing barding. I mean, there's been Berserk and there's been Mad. So that's a walkthrough of monster stats. Let's just show you how it looks in the Rules Cyclopedia so that you can see the information in context with the creature's description. There you go, the BECMI Berserker. I still take personal exception to that intelligence score though. There's just one more thing to show you here, and that's how this information was translated into abbreviated monster listings, more commonly referred to today as stat blocks. Essentially, in BECMI and old school Dungeons & Dragons adventure publications, a monster's stats were transposed into a linear fashion, so that it could appear within the text of a scenario. This is an early one from the Keep on the Borderlands. It contains simple references in case the information is required, whilst still being easy for the DM to refer to. Stat blocks evolved a little bit by the time the Rules Cyclopedia came along, but they were still far from the huge boxes of text found in modern publications. Here's a template I threw together to put my Berserker information into. You can see that I've included reference to the monster's hit points total, which I would have worked out for my scenario, and also its THAC0, so that I do not have to refer to a hit roll chart. In addition, the SA and SD entries refer to special attacks and special defenses found in the monster's description. Okay, let's go ahead and fill this out for my Berserker. You can see that I've included only the immediately required information. What I've left out is the number appearing, I already know as it's in my scenario design, and treasure type, again because I've already worked that out. The special attack of +2 to hit is noted, which I have accounted for in how I have recorded the THAC0. Any reference to special defenses has been removed, as a Berserker does not have any. So basically the stat block has acted as a summary of the monster stats, to be inserted into any piece of scenario text required. It is also easily editable should I wish to individualize any aspects of the monster. So there you have it, a rather thorough walkthrough of BECMI monster stats and how to present an accompanying stat block, with a good bit of rule stuff in between. I hope you found it useful. How do you find monster statistic presentation in BECMI and other old school games? Do you think they've evolved for the better in later editions? Or do you prefer the old way and think they contain all you need? It would be good to know. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this run through of monster stats in the BECMI game. Please consider liking this video if you did indeed like it, and also subscribing if I've earned your future attention. Otherwise, I'm BECMI Berserker. Keep making your saving throws, and I hope to see you back here soon.